Hi, I'm Christopher Stewart, or as the UK would remember me best, Shane Bryant. Now, let's have a little bit of fun, okay? Characters. I said before, Game of Thrones is a wonderful thing to study, and it truly is. A lot of the people in Game of Thrones worked incredibly hard to create really incredible characters. So let's pick a character from Game of Thrones. Now, one of the easiest characters for me to think about is Ramsey Snow. Why? Because he's a psychopath. And psychopaths for me are really simple and easy. Well, let's get down to basics. Sometimes when you're working, especially overseas, you have to work with everybody around you to create a collective. Okay? In Game of Thrones, there is an underlying British accent in just about everybody. Now, granted, most of them are English, but if you're going to assimilate yourself into that cast, you need to learn to pick up that type of accent to make your character believable that they are in the same area of the country, of the fantasy world of Game of Thrones, as the people around them. Okay? You don't necessarily want to throw Scotch-Irish, because a lot of the Scotch-Irish are wildlings, are some of the northerners, that kind of thing. So the Scotch-Irish is more of a restrictive to the northern area of Game of Thrones, whereas normal kind of British is sort of south. So you'd want to kind of slip into a basic British or light British, maybe a London accent, in order to be comfortable with everybody around you, so that your character actually sounds like they're in the same country as everybody else. To do a British accent, to do a light British accent, the easiest thing to remember is that in America, everything is very harsh, very specific, very direct. If I'm going to say something like, that's terrible, the pronunciation of my syllables is that's terrible. If I'm going to say something like, it's frustrating, it's very direct, it's very sharp, it's very hard on the syllables. Whereas in the British, they have a very light attitude towards a lot of the syllables. And they play with the syllables. They almost make them musically, so that every syllable almost tells you something. And that's where you get the British, that's terribly frustrating. That's a little bit Scottish to it. It's all terribly frustrating. You know? So I have to work on it a bit. But that's the basic understanding of where you get a lot of the British accents, is you have to think about the specific words. A lot of times when I'm working on accents, I'll sit there with a recorder, I'll work for an hour to 2 hours, which I'm not going to do in this small little segment. I'm not going to try and make everything perfect. I'm just giving you a basic overlay of how to do or how I do things. You have the character of Ramsey Snow. Now, before we look at anything, who actually is Ramsey Snow? He is a Bolton. He is a complete psychopath. He's a torturer. He's an interrogator. He's the kind of person that almost fits an SS German attitude. And you have to take that into him. Where does he fit in the meter of slime and sophistication? Well, he is very slimy in what he is, in what he does, in his attitudes, in the way he torments people. He's slimy. But he's extremely sophisticated, because though he was a bastard, he was raised an aristocrat. And he wants to one day aspire to being an aristocrat. So in that, you have to realize that he's trying at all times to be better than himself, to do the proper thing around the proper people, when called for. And then he kind of slips into his insanity. With Ramsey Snow, you have to put him through several meters. You have to put him through the slime and sophistication meter. You have to also put him through a sanity and insanity meter. Because when is he actually sane? He's sane when he's talking to his father. Presumably, if he was called to court, he would be sane. And he would be the genteel, and he would be presenting the proper front. As we saw throughout the play, however, his front deteriorates when he starts getting bored with it. You know, he's being the proper son. Dad came home, and now Dad's been home for 3 months. He's now at the dinner table. He's starting to slack. He's starting to go back into his familiar ways, which is how he kind of slips in and out of insanity. He's perfectly sane when he's laying a trap, when he's being the quiet person with Greyjoy and he's trying to get Greyjoy to talk to him and to trust him. And then he slips right into the insanity. Okay? Then you also have to put him on a different meter, which is a strange meter to use. It's a meter which is more performance grade. Do I want my character to scare you? What is the intended audience level? Okay, these are things you have to think about when you're thinking horror. Because if you become too over the top with your performance, then it will be too accentuated, too terrible, and you'll have to tone it down. Even the director will tell you to tone it down under certain circumstances, simply because it's too much. Okay? So you have to kind of work within that parameter. The best thing to do is to create a middle ground when you create your character at first off. Because you can always get more intense. And becoming less intense is not as difficult if you're starting from a middle point. Okay? Now, anytime you look at a character, you have to look at a number of different lines. So when you put all of that into play, you have to also realize, will this work with this set of lines? Will it work with that set of lines? Will it work with another set of lines? And what you get is somebody like, "Excuse me. Sorry. Were you sleeping?" Now, we're going to play a game. I tell you, or you tell me, who I am, where you are, and I don't cut off your little finger. Now, that's a rough quick. We could work on that a bit. He's a little bit too insane there, but then again, he was a little bit insane in that performance grade. So you have to look at it from a different perspective. Anytime you try to work on a specific character, you want to do this a number of times. They did. Okay? The actor who portrayed this character probably spent a week preparing for it. So once you finally see the performance grade, if you can get it in 5 seconds, cool, but that's not the issue. And you're not trying to show that you can be better or worse than him. You're trying to be as good. Nothing more, nothing less. A lot of times people put their heart and soul into things and they really work hard and they don't want to see somebody else kind of come along and botch the job, so to speak. So you kind of get that whole feeling for it. You have to really sink into who is Ramsay Bolton. Okay? So let me think more along the lines of a little bit more sophistication, a little less slime. Kraken. Wonderful creature, strong, fierce, in the water. Take it out of the water. And it collapses. It has no bones. Well, he said the only king in the north was a Stark, and he'd be damned if he'd kiss a traitor's boot. So I flayed him living. Made his son watch. Knew where to go and pays his taxes. You'd have to work in an actual British accent underlining it, but you want to work the character to the character before you think about what kind of accent he would be. It's easy to create the accent and work with the accent, especially when you're talking with a cast of individuals with the same accent. And people will help you create a proper British accent when you're in amongst a British cast. But you know, you want to think primarily about the character of Ramsay Bolton and exactly what would he do? How would he think? Okay. He looks at his father in one scene and says, I don't need an army. Give me 20 good men. Now that might be a very simple line. But when you understand he needs to be sophisticated at this point because he needs his father to believe him. Okay? Then you have the fallout thing of, Yes. True. But you forgot to ask me if I'm a liar, which I'm afraid I am. This isn't happening to you for a reason. And that's another thing about performances. You can throw in a laugh, which is slightly psychotic and slightly demoralizing within your speech. And in that sense, you build a character which can be terrifying, but at the same time, it can also be very eerie. Okay? If you were to look at this guy on an X that you're about to torture and go, now, which body part is your least favorite? That's almost too over the top. It almost makes you wonder just how insane is this person. So you want to cut it back a little bit. So, which body part is your most favorite? Well, I mean, you don't need your ears, do you? You don't need 2 ears. You know, and you can always work from experience on prior roles and prior things that you've done. That kind of thing. But you're looking at the whole concept of just how crazy can he be, but how believable can he be? Now, I would work with this and I would listen to everything I did and I would tune it so that every line I'd go over and over and over again until I produced a perfect character. Accent work can be tricky. Okay, I worked on a French Greek accent with a French Greek who was teaching me how to actually speak his dialect. And it took me somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 hours to get it right, just going over the lines and over the lines and over the lines. And once you get to that point, you can also slip in and out without even thinking. You can talk to your friends and then suddenly action, and all of a sudden there you are in the accent of your character. The more you know the lines, the more inside and out your character, the more you have a basis of understanding of who your character is, of how well you know the lines, of how well you're going to create the accent, of how you're going to create the ambiance. When all of this is already done in your head and already done through practice and repetition with a tape recorder, then you are free to sit there, pay attention to the set, pay attention to the director, let him tell you what he wants you to do. And it's just second nature because you're already in character. You already know the lines backwards and forwards. You know your lines, you know their lines, you know every line in and out of the entire sequence that you're going to be doing that day. You know how you're going to perform it, what kind of accent you're going to be using. You're so into that accent that it takes you 4 seconds just to go snap, and there you are. You have to understand, when we were in Italy, we did this extremely fast. We didn't have 3 days to take and shoot something that lasts 15 minutes on screen. We had a day to shoot an hour-and-a-half movie. So a lot of this can be sped up. The main thing you need to speed it up, however, is friends who are going to sit there and help you. People with the accent. Okay. When I worked in Britain, I did a lot of British accents primarily because I was working right along a lot of people from England who were allowing me to listen to them talk constantly and correcting me anytime my accent went slightly off, or when I started sounding too American and not enough Brit. And that's when they would sit there and say, wait, try this. And they'd say my lines again, and I'd listen to them and go, okay, and I'd say it again, and if need be, I'd take a tape recorder, listen to my own voice, tune it, and then go with it. So that's a good idea of a basic character sketch, a basic character build. Ramsey is an easy character to get in and out of. It takes nothing at all, because all you got to think about is, I'm the craziest person on earth, and I'm going to skin somebody alive. And I'm not just going to skin them alive, I enjoy skinning them alive. And I enjoy their screams, and I can't wait to get under his fingernails and just look at how his inside moves. And yeah, what was that again? Oh, yeah, I was going to say, now, Theon, the question of the day is, where are you? And who am I? And why are we doing this to you? If you answer correctly, well, you win. But if you answer incorrectly, I get to cut off your little finger. If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. Now, come on. Who am I? Where are you? And why am I doing this to you? Terrible guess. Do I look like a fucking Humber to you? Wrong again. Yes. You're right. But you forgot to ask me if I'm a liar. Which, unfortunately, I am. This isn't happening to you for a reason. Well, one reason